Hello and welcome to the week in Parliament. The House of Lords weighs into the arguments over Brexit. A Labour peer says colleagues must stand up for the interests of the young.
This House should be urging a rethink on this whole project. This House should be saying, not in our name.
Yeah. But a Conservative offers peers this reassurance on Brexit, even if there's no deal.
There is no greater nonsense than the claim that in the absence of a trade agreement with the EU, we shall be falling off a cliff edge. There is no cliff edge, for the simple reason that there is no cliff.
Also on the programme, some powerful speeches and surprising revelations during a debate about Donald Trump.
Which one of us has not made some ridiculous sexual comment sometime in our past? Well, in private, you know, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, all right?
But first, the bill authorising the government to start the formal process for leaving the EU has been approved by the Commons. Now it's the turn of the House of Lords to chew over the legislation. In a marathon debate over 2 days, there were 184 speakers. To add to the sense of occasion, there was a surprise visitor in the Lords. In a very unusual move, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, went to the upper chamber to listen to the start of the debate. It was the second reading of the EU notification of withdrawal bill. Technically, that means a general discussion on the principles of the bill. But as the bill is short and narrow in scope, the debate ranged over wider territory, the pros and cons of Brexit, possible amendments to the bill, and the role of the House of Lords.
The government is determined to trigger Article 50 by the 31st of March in order to deliver on the decision of the British people. The bill before us is a procedural part of that withdrawal process. I welcome the constructive tone we have heard from the opposition that they will not seek to frustrate this process, while of course undertaking the scrutiny role we are here to perform. We will not be threatened into not fulfilling our normal constitutional role, and neither will we be goaded into acting irresponsibly. We have to have a serious and a responsible debate. And in doing so, if we ask the House of Commons to look again at an issue, it is not a constitutional outrage, but a constitutional responsibility.
There's a world of difference between blocking the bill and seeking to amend it. So, my lords, if we clearly have the power to amend the bill, should we positively seek to do so? My lords, I believe that we should.
There is a respectable argument, which other noble and learned lords may say something about later in this debate, that only Parliament, by legislation, has the constitutional authority to authorise the concluding of an agreement with the EU or the act of withdrawal, if that is what the government decides that it has to do.
Now, as is well known, I was a Remainer, not, I might say, because of my pension rights, but because I am a patriot rather than a nationalist.
There is no greater nonsense than the claim that in the absence of a trade agreement with the EU, we shall be falling off a cliff edge. There is no cliff edge, for the simple reason that there is no cliff. Absent a trade agreement with the EU, we shall continue to trade with our former partners, but on WTO terms. Some noble lords may be unaware that the UK already does far more trade with the rest of the world than it does with the rest of the EU, and the gap is widening with every year that passes. And the overwhelming bulk of our trade with the rest of the world is on WTO terms.
That was day one of the Lords' debate on the Brexit bill. To accommodate everyone who wanted to speak, the Lords had an early start the following day.
I made my maiden speech in the House of Commons in 1972 in favour of our membership of the European Union on the European Community's Third Reading Act. I little dreamt that 45 years later I would be standing up and actually advocating the reverse procedure, namely that we should withdraw from the organisation I advocated joining. But it's not me who's changed, but I think Europe, as was symbolised in its change of name from the European Economic Community to the European Community, finally to the European Union.
It was only in 1965 that President Johnson gave the African Americans the vote in America. In 50, 100 years' time, when people come to look at this debate here, they will be equally shocked and surprised that until 2016, this country, Britain, was still contracting out its laws to be made by people we did not elect, we did not know, and could not sack. My lords, the time for pay and obey is done, not before time.
History will record what each of us does, and our children and grandchildren and theirs in turn will ask, what did you do when this was decided? What did you do at this crucial juncture? Were you shackled by convention, fearful that you were going to be abolished? Did you dance to the tune of the Daily Mail? Or did you stand up for principle and posterity and for the values of tolerance and inclusion and for the interests of our young and, in fact, for the neglected communities in our midst? I will support vital amendments, and if they're not accepted, I'm going to vote against this bill. This House should be urging a rethink on this whole project. This House should be saying, not in our name.
Lord Panic is the lawyer who led the Brexit case against the government in the Supreme Court.
It's for us to scrutinise a bill of enormous importance to the future of this country. And I think that this bill requires amendment. And it requires amendment in particular to ensure parliamentary sovereignty as the process of withdrawal occurs over the next 2 years.
One has to ask why those who base their arguments for Brexit on the will of the people are now opposed to consulting the people on the outcome of the negotiations. One has to suspect that they fear that they will get a different answer. If so, we ought to know.
The Lords will now start debating amendments to the bill. They include proposals to give EU citizens in the UK the right to remain, a legal commitment to a parliamentary vote to approve any deal reached with the EU, and a referendum on any final deal. I'll discuss these amendments as well as the wider challenges facing the Lords with two former members of the European Parliament, the Liberal Democrat Baroness Ludford and the Conservative Lord Callanan. I asked Lord Callanan if he could support an amendment on rights for EU citizens.
No, I wouldn't support an amendment on that. And the reason is that the government have already tried to get this agreed by the European Council. So, of course, we want to be concerned about EU nationals here, but we also want to be concerned about the 2 million British nationals that are living in other EU member states. And there's a reciprocity here. The government already proposed this in the Council, saying, look, can we get this agreed? And a couple of member states, France and Germany, said, no, we have to leave it for the start of the negotiations. So a unilateral move from the UK side to say, well, actually, we'll just grant this without any converse agreement for UK citizens risks the whole thing being forgotten about and shoved away and uncertainty continuing for UK citizens. Whereas if we say nothing about it, if we leave it for the start of the negotiations, then I very much suspect it'll be the first thing agreed and everybody will be happy. But a preemptive move on this could disadvantage those of our own UK citizens who are other European countries.
That's not what the groups representing Brits in other EU countries believe. They believe it's important to kickstart the process, to have a catalyst in it, as it were, by the UK government taking the first move. It's perfectly reasonable for the other EU countries to say that everything has to be actually negotiated under the same umbrella. So, of course, it was unrealistic. I mean, the government is searching for a fig leaf about why it won't offer this unilateral guarantee, and it does not undermine Brits abroad, partly because the really sort of politically difficult argument is in this country. You don't hear the same sort of noises against sort of Brits exercising their free movement rights in other countries.
Well, I don't think we have consensus on that one. Could we get consensus on whether there should be a parliamentary vote on any final deal? People like Lord Butler, Lord Panic have suggested that might in fact be the legal route to go down, that would protect the government from any legal challenge in future. Lord Callanan, could you support such an amendment on a parliamentary vote?
Well, the government have already said that there will be, and indeed there has to be, a parliamentary vote on the final deal.
Why not put it in the bill?
The argument is about exactly when that will take place, which will depend on the structure of the negotiations, when everything's agreed. The commitment the government have given is that they intend that there will be a final vote before the European Parliament votes on it, so once everything is agreed. And I think that should be good enough for other members. I've got a nasty suspicion that this is all part of the Liberal Democrats' attempt to refight the referendum, to delay the whole process, to stop it actually happening, because they didn't agree with the results.
Well, this is true, isn't it? You didn't agree with the result.
I'm sure the
crossbenchers.
I'm sure the crossbenchers who are among the leaders. Lord Pannock is no Liberal Democrat, as you know. Lord Pannock is a crossbencher, and so are some of his other colleagues who are leading. Lord Hope, for instance. I mean, you know, distinguished lawyers on this. I mean, what the government is offering is a sort of take it or leave it between this deal and no deal. And what I think people are looking for is a much more meaningful vote, something that's more dynamic, which would say, would assess any deal the government came back with, and if it wasn't adequate, would send them back to have another go.
Is this a risky time for the Lords? Is the way you handle this bill going to be crucial to your future, to your reputation, to your existence even? There was a threat of abolition.
I hope not. I think there's been a few noises off. I think the Prime Minister demonstrated how seriously she takes the House by coming for the for the opening speeches on Monday, and nobody officially has said there is any threat to the Lords. The Lords has a proper constitutional role to look, review, revise government legislation, to ask the House of Commons to think again if necessary. I hope we won't do that in this case, given the importance of the bill and given the background of the referendum. But I suppose that's possible, that one or two amendments might be passed. Ask the House of Commons to think again. If they do, and it comes back again, I think we'd be really pushing our luck to pursue it any further.
You could agree with some of that, couldn't you?
Absolutely. Yes, Martin's made the case, really. I mean, there's been a lot of huffing and puffing, just as there was over the tax credits, which, of course, eventually absolutely collapsed. The government, you know, just sort of collapsed the Stout Party. The Lord knows its constitutional limits. It also knows its constitutional duty and powers, which are to scrutinise, to call the government to account, and, if amendments are passed, to ask the Commons, hopefully with a rather persuasive voice, to look again, to think again.
Are you saying, then, that if the Commons reject any Lords amendments, then you will give in at that stage?
I can't predict what is going to happen in the process.
Well, we're talking about reputation. Next week there'll be a documentary, Meet the Lords, in which Baroness de Souza has made some fairly serious claims about allowances and how they're claimed. I wonder if we could have a look at a clip now.
There is a core of peers who work incredibly hard, who do that work. And there are, sad to say, many, many, many peers who contribute absolutely nothing, but who claim the full allowance. I can remember one occasion when I was leaving the House quite late, and there was a peer, who shall be utterly nameless, who jumped out of a taxi just outside the pier's entrance and left the engine running. He ran in, presumably to show that he'd attended, and then ran out again while the taxi was still running.
OK, you are both, of course, hard-working peers. Are you aware of other peers turning up briefly just to claim £300 in allowance and then going home?
No, is the answer to your question. I think if that is the case, then, you know, Baroness de Souza should name the person responsible. It's all right well to make allegations, but, you know, she said that person should be utterly nameless. They should be named. Let's find out who it is and find out if this is going on, because I think it's unacceptable.
How do you feel seeing that clip and hearing that allegation?
Well, obviously I don't like anything that apparently brings the Lords into disrepute, and I'm a little bit surprised because Baroness de Souza was Lord Speaker, and I'm quite surprised if she felt that there were these things happening, that they weren't followed up with the, you know, right authorities or whatever.
Lord Callanan, Baroness Ludford, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
The ongoing debate on Brexit. Also high on the agenda this week, the prospective state visit to the UK by the American President Donald Trump. 1.8 million people signed a petition objecting to the visit, enough to trigger a debate in Parliament. As MPs launched into a feisty exchange of views, there was a protest outside in Parliament Square. Protesters urged politicians to withdraw the invitation to Donald Trump. At times, their chants could be heard inside Westminster Hall. The anti-Trump petition wasn't the only one on the table. A counter-petition supporting the visit mustered 300,000 signatures, and for 3 hours, MPs argued the issue.
Only 2 presidents of the United States have been granted a state visit since 1952. It's extraordinary that that's the situation. But here we have a position where 7 days into his presidency, he's invited to have the full panoply of a state visit. Extraordinary, completely unprecedented.
The fact is that there were 61 million people who voted for Donald Trump. And when we stand up in this country and then condemn him for being racist, and I've seen no evidence of that, I have seen no evidence of him being racist or that they attack him in an unseemly way, we're actually attacking the American people, the 61 million people who voted for Donald Trump.
I want to remind the Chamber that there are many African Americans in America sitting at home in fear. They are concerned about a president that has had the support of the Ku Klux Klan. They are concerned about a president that has welcomed white supremacists. It's a term that we almost hope would sort of fall into history.
Mr. Trump is not my sort of conservative. I really have nothing in common with him. But I will say that let's look at some of his comments. The charge of misogyny. I mean, of course, what he said, what he was reported to say in a private conversation is absolutely horrible and ridiculous, and I hope none of us would make it. But which one of us has not made some ridiculous sexual comment sometime in our past? Well, in private, you know, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, all right?
Listen carefully and you'll hear the thousands of people outside right now in this house, outside this house, saying they do not want Donald Trump to be coming into this country on a royal state visit. We have a duty to listen to these people, to give them a voice. And if people from the Trump administration are listening, this is not fake news. The people who are protesting outside, these are not alternative facts. These are real protests from British people who do not want to give him a royal visit.
The Commons Speaker, John Bercow, raised a few eyebrows when he announced that he would oppose any attempt to allow Donald Trump to address MPs in Parliament. That intervention sparked a mini-campaign to oust the Speaker. A Conservative, James Duddridge, has tabled a no-confidence motion. So far, 5 MPs have put their names to it. Undaunted, Mr Duddridge raised it with the Speaker.
Point of order, Mr James Duddridge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for seeing me and granting a point of order. Notwithstanding, Mr Speaker, the underwhelming support for my vote of no confidence in you, has the government or indeed the Backbench Business Committee contacted you in any way to allocate time for this unresolved matter to be debated and indeed voted on?
Short answer is no, and there is absolutely no reason why they should have done, a point which I can say from my own head and heart, fortified in the knowledge that it is also the sound advice of the experienced clerk of the House who's been working in the service of the House for 40 years.
Now for a quick roundup of a few other stories in Westminster. The Home Affairs Committee is investigating the government's decision to close a scheme giving sanctuary to lone child refugees from Europe.
We are very disappointed that the DUB scheme has closed. We would like the DUB scheme to remain open and to remain as a safe and legal route for unaccompanied child refugees who are in Europe to seek sanctuary in the UK. I think the impact that we've seen of the closure and of some of the kind of confusion around what's been going on is quite severe.
The local government secretary, SAJID JAVID, said he understood how it felt to face higher business rate bills. He promised more support for businesses in next month's budget.
Now, growing up above the family shop, I saw for myself the impact an increase in rates can have on small businesses. A rise in costs lowered the mood of the whole family. Even as a child, I knew that it wasn't good when I found a stack of bright red final reminders hidden away at the back of the drawer.
And calls to limit investigations into claims against British veterans who served in Northern Ireland. MPs say cases should only proceed if new evidence is uncovered.
It is wrong that our veterans are sitting at home wondering if perhaps a third or a fourth investigation is now going to take place into their case simply because some hot
fast-thinking, make a quick buck human rights lawyer in Belfast thinks it's a good idea to reopen this case.
A fortnight ago, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, sprang a surprise on Theresa May at Prime Minister's questions. He read out leaked text messages which, he said, indicated the government had offered Surrey County Council a special deal to fund social care. His remarks were widely reported, and the Department for Local Government spent that day rejecting the assertions. At the latest session of PMQs, Mr Corbyn returned to the same territory.
2 weeks ago, we found out about the sweetheart deal with Tory Surrey. When will the other 151 social services departments in England get the same as the Surrey deal?
Prime Minister. The right honourable gentleman refers to the questions he asked me about Surrey County Council 2 weeks ago. Those claims were utterly destroyed the same afternoon. So rather than asking the same question, he should stand up and apologise.
Her government has put the NHS and social care in a state of emergency. 9 out of 10 NHS trusts are unsafe. 18,000 patients a week are waiting. Mr Speaker, I repeat the figure. 18,000 patients a week are waiting on trolleys in hospital corridors. We need a government that puts the NHS first and will invest in our NHS.
First of all, I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that he should consider correcting the record, because 54% of hospital trusts are considered good or outstanding, quite different from the figure that he has shown. Secondly, I will take no lessons on the NHS from the party. The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party says we should take lessons from the NHS. I won't take any lessons from the party that presided over Mid-Staffs Hospital. And the day when it happened in Mid-Staffs Hospital.
Jamal al-Harith, a British citizen, was held as a terror suspect in Guantanamo Bay in 2002 after the US forces seized him in Pakistan. He was released in 2004. The Daily Mail has claimed that the British government gave him £1 million in compensation. His family has denied the claim. Jamal al-Harith subsequently joined the so-called Islamic State group, and last week he carried out a suicide attack at an army base in Iraq. The Home Office was called to the Commons to make a statement, but the Minister couldn't say very much about the case.
Everyone understands there will be information that cannot be revealed because of intelligence reasons. However, he has provided far too little information about such a serious case. Can he confirm whether Mr al-Harith was made any payment, and also, notwithstanding the subsequent welcome legislation which had cross-party support to tighten the law, would he agree that people across the country will feel sickened at the idea of large payments being made to someone who may have been involved in serious terrorist activity?
Like her and like my constituents, we will be outraged and disappointed by the sums of money that have been paid. But the sums of money that have been paid and been reported to have been paid, I can't comment on the individual cases, and unlike former Home Secretaries, the government is bound by its legal obligations that it has made, and we cannot break those legal commitments. But I can say that some of the vulnerability that led us to have to pay those damages occurred when she was a member of the Labour government and when those individuals brought claims against us.
And let's take a look at what's been happening in the wider world of politics this week. With our countdown, here's Julia Butler.
Labour's deputy leader Tom Watson appeared to perform a dab at PMQs this week to congratulate Jeremy Corbyn after his exchanges with the Prime Minister. The dance craze originates in the US hip-hop scene. Former Employment Secretary Lord Tebbit was given a taste of his own medicine as he lambasted cycle lanes in London. Labour peer Lord Hunt gave the former Cabinet Minister a piece of his mind. You can't even watch the Brit Awards to escape from politics. US singer Katy Perry's performance used some dancing White Housers and 2 puppets that were dressed to look like Donald Trump and Theresa May. Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson confessed he was the victim of mistaken identity during a recent visit to Newcastle.
I was mistaken for Mr. Trump in Newcastle. A very humbling experience it was, as you can imagine.
And next week we'll have 2 new MPs as a double by-election bill saw Labour hold Stoke-on-Trent Central while the Tories snatched Copeland.
Julia Butler reporting. And that's it from me for now, but do join Alicia McCarthy on Monday night at 11 for a roundup of the day here at Westminster. But from me, Christina Cooper, goodbye.